a body by the river, and a mask hiding the truth. Welcome to Mystery Sherlock. I am your host, Edward Sterling. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love seeing it. Now, let the mystery unfold. It was upon a bleak November morning, with a grey mist clinging to Baker Street and the river fog rolling thick from the Thames, that Sherlock Holmes received one of the most curious cases of his career. The fire in our sitting room at 221B burned low, casting faint orange patterns upon Holmes's sharp profile as he leaned back in his armchair, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin. The knock upon our door was brisk, impatient, and carried the unmistakable rhythm of authority. Mrs. Hudson ushered in a tall man in a dark Inverness cape, Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard, his thin face drawn with fatigue and the faint sheen of fog still clinging to his whiskers. "Holmes," he began without preamble, "I've a devil of a business on my hands, and if ever I've needed your assistance, it's this morning." Holmes's grey eyes flickered with interest. "Then you've come to the right place, my dear Lestrade. The morning papers offer nothing but tedium, and I was beginning to think London had grown honest overnight." He gestured toward the armchair opposite him. "Pray take a seat. What villainy is the Yard contending with today?" Lestrade removed his hat and sank into the chair, his manner grave. "It's a murder down by the Riverside, sir, a most peculiar one. A body was found at dawn beneath the Blackfriars Bridge, male, well-dressed, possibly of good birth. But that's not the odd part." Holmes raised an eyebrow. "I presume there is an odd part." "Aye," said Lestrade. "The man was wearing a mask, a plain white mask, the sort used in masquerade balls. And get this, no identification, no papers, nothing but a single crimson handkerchief in his breast pocket, embroidered with the letter R. We've sent word to the registries, but so far the name and face remain unknown. Only one witness claims to have seen him alive last night, a street sweeper who swears he saw a masked gentleman walking along the embankment around midnight, followed by another figure in a dark cloak." Holmes leaned forward, his expression tightening into focus. "And the cause of death?" "Strangulation," Lestrade replied. "Clean and deliberate. No weapon found. We're stumped. The man might have been robbed, but his watch and cufflinks were untouched. No signs of struggle. No footprints by the riverbank save his own." Holmes rose and began to pace the room. "A masked corpse by the river, untouched valuables, and a second figure who follows. Fascinating. The location, the disguise, and the silence all point to an affair both deliberate and personal, a duel of wits, perhaps, rather than force." He paused by the window, watching the fog swirl outside. "What time was the body discovered?" 6:30, Lestrade said. "A waterman spotted the figure caught against a pier. We've taken him to the station house on Tooley Street for examination. Will you come, Mr. Holmes?" Holmes turned sharply, his eyes gleaming. "Watson, your hat and coat. The game is afoot." As we rode through the damp, grey streets toward the river, I could not help but feel a chill beyond the November air. Holmes, silent and withdrawn, and tapped a finger rhythmically against his knee. "Note, Watson," he murmured finally. "A mask conceals identity, but why conceal the identity of the dead? The handkerchief marked R, the untouched valuables. These are signals, not accidents. Someone wanted this corpse to be found, yet not known." When we arrived at the Riverside station, the scene was as grim as Lestrade had promised. The air was thick with the smell of the Thames, that unique mixture of damp, smoke, and decay. The body lay upon a table beneath a flickering gas lamp, pale and motionless, the white mask still upon its face. Holmes approached with the precision of a surgeon, examining every detail: the fine stitching of the man's coat, the foreign-cut boots, the faint watermarks on his gloves. Then, with one swift motion, he removed the mask. I started, for beneath it lay the face of a man in his early 30s, handsome but lifeless, his expression frozen in calm surprise. Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Watson," he said quietly, "this man has been dead no less than 6 hours, yet there are no bruises about the neck, save one faint ligature mark. The strangler was methodical, almost professional. And see here, the faintest scent upon his collar, bergamot, expensive, Italian. Curious, is it not?" Lestrade frowned. "You think he was foreign?" Holmes smiled faintly. "No, Lestrade. I think he dined with someone who was." He straightened, brushing invisible dust from his sleeve. "This gentleman is no common crime. There's meaning in every gesture, the mask, the river, the perfume. We stand upon the threshold of an elaborate deception, and before the week is out, or I dare say the fog of London shall lift to reveal something extraordinary indeed." As we stepped back into the cold air, the bells of St. Paul's tolled through the mist. Holmes paused upon the embankment, his gaze fixed on the dark sweep of the Thames. "Watson," he murmured, "there are faces hidden behind masks, and then there are masks that reveal more than faces ever could. Let us see which sort we have found today." The river lapped quietly against the stones, and somewhere in that heavy fog the murderer was watching. The fog did not lift as we quitted the station, but drew close as a curtain, so that the lamps along the embankment appeared as blurred coins sunk in milk. Holmes walked at a swift pace, silent, except for the occasional low hum that meant his mind was in full employment. In the cab he sat curled in his habitual attitude, ties half closed, fingers pressed together, and I knew better than to trouble him with speculation. Only when the familiar bulk of Marylebone Church loomed through the grey did he stir and glance down at the gloves I had not troubled to remove. "You have been more occupied with the man's face than his hands, Watson," he said. "See how the residue upon your right glove gleams dully in this light. Fish oil from the waterman's ropes. Had you examined the fingers of the deceased as closely as his collar, you would have noticed a faint crescent of black under 2 nails, graphite, not the ordinary grime of the river bank." "I confess I looked for bruising and missed it," said I. "Graphite?" "Blacklead, as our grandparents would have it," Holmes replied with a quick smile. "A hint of the draftsman or of stage cosmetics. No, we shall see which." He tapped the roof and we rolled to a halt before Baker Street. Within our rooms the fire had gathered itself to a healthy glow. Holmes, who could at times be brusque with his comfort, now showed a domestic energy, drawing the shutters, wheeling the chemical table closer, and setting upon it a tray on which Lestrade, before departing, had permitted him to bring a few trifles from the scene, the white mask, the crimson handkerchief embroidered with the single letter, and one of the gloves which had been removed for the post-mortem. "You will oblige me, Watson, by noting the order," he said, in a tone I recognized as part jocular and part pedagogic. "First the plain facts, then their arrangement. A mask conceals, a monogram proclaims, a river erases. Someone wished to conceal and proclaim simultaneously while relying upon the Thames to do the rest. That paradox is our first friend. He set the mask upon black velvet, as a jeweller might. It was of good card, stiffened with some varnish, and pierced for a black ribbon." Holmes held a lens to its rim, and uttered a small sound of satisfaction. "There is wax upon the inner edge, just at the cheek, a clear, pale drop, scented, no, not bergamot, that we found upon the collar, This is plain beeswax. See how it has captured a few glittering motes. Gilt powder, stage gilt. A theatre, then, I ventured, or a ball where the theatrical is borrowed? He turned to the handkerchief. Now for our heraldic banner, crimson silk, the thread raised in the letter R, mark the flourish at the tail, a little barbed stroke, seldom used by English embroiderers. This is more common upon the continent, yet the weave is that of a Regent Street house. One may learn much in the windows if one chooses to walk as far as the circus on a wet afternoon. Lastly, the glove. He lifted it delicately. Foreign-cut boots upon the gentleman, English leather upon his hands, but the glove seam is pricked with a shorter stitch than our factories prefer. An import, retailed here. He laid these items aside and stood, his head tilted, listening not to sound but to his own chain of reason. Let us catalogue what is not there. No mud in the heel's crevice, remarkable, given the state of the bank. The soles were damp, but the edges clean. Our man did not scramble where he was found. He was brought. But the waterman swears he drifted in, said I. The waterman speaks of what he saw at 6:30. I speak of what the leather tells me at midnight. Holmes's eyes shone. Tide, Watson. Last night's tide turned just after 1. If our masked gentleman stood by Blackfriars at 12, he could not have floated to that pier, as seen without leaving a story of silt upon his edges. He was introduced to the river later, perhaps from a boat. He took up his violin then, played 2 or 3 notes, and set it down again with a soft laugh. Forgive me. The problem began to hum in the key of D. Lestrade thinks robbery. The public will think intrigue. Both will be aided by the mask. But note the bergamot, the gilt, the beeswax, the clean soles, the foreign cut of the boot, and the letter R in a continental hand. These are not the accidents of a back alley. They are the signs of a room and of preparation. A ballroom, I suggested. Or you spoke of borrowed theatricality. Consider the calendar, said Holmes. He crossed to the mantel, where he kept an almanac with notes in his thin hand. The last Friday of each month, the lyric rooms in Hanover Square admit a certain masquerade patronized by gentlemen of standing who like their gaiety veiled, a harmless diversion for most, but an excellent anonymity for some. If our friend wore his mask there, it would explain the wax and gilt. A ribbon pin or a touch of wax is often used to fasten the mask to a beard-prone face. The scent of bergamot, Italian, may point to a partner, a supper companion, or a foreign perfumer import kept by the house in its retiring rooms. You have been to these lyric rooms? I asked, unable to keep the curiosity from my voice. I have been everywhere, he returned, dryly, or to nowhere. He set the mask down with a gentle push so that it revolved slightly. Observe the inner ribbon, a faint abrasion, not at the nape where one would expect, but at the left cheek. The knot was on the side, tied by another's hand, a woman's, I would say, from the gentleness of the pull. Yet the knot was tightened in haste. See the crushed fibre. Someone adjusted it shortly before death. At the ball, I said. Then our second figure in the dark cloak may as easily be a cabman with his cape as an assassin with his mantle, Holmes cut in. Do not commit yourself to a cloak too soon, my dear fellow. We have better material. Search your notes. Did you remark the cufflinks? I did, I said. 2 serpents intertwined with a small hallmark, though I could not read it. Ah, he clapped softly. Hallmarks do not lie, and they have the courtesy to leave addresses. And those serpents likely come from Torrington and Blythe in Jermyn Street. They have a fashion this season for classical devices in silver gilt. If our man purchased them, his account may speak to us. If they were a gift, it may speak even louder. He fell silent, and in that pause the city made itself heard, the clatter of a hansom on wet stones, the cry of a newsboy hawking late editions, the distant deep note of a steamer on the river. Then Holmes's gaze, which had a habit of sharpening, as if a lens had slipped into place behind the eye, moved to my sleeve. "You wore your old overcoat to the station," he remarked. "I did, and exchanged it for the newer one before we left again. There is a bruise on your left forearm of yesterday's date. No, do not look so startled. The cut of your cuff reveals a stiffness as you draw it. You have been wrestling with that obstinate bookcase in the surgery." I laughed in spite of myself. "Mrs. Hudson will be glad to have you keep to the murder, Holmes. She dislikes the bookcase." "So do I," he returned. "Now to the murder. We must go presently to Hanover Square, and after that to Jermyn Street. But first I should like a word with the street sweeper who saw the gentleman at midnight. Lestrade has his name in the docket. A witness of that class often observes what their betters ignore, for the city speaks in their language. If he noted the second figure's gait, the height, even the rhythm of the step, we shall gain more than by a week's newspaper speculations." He took up his hat, then paused before the hearth. "There is another small point. You perceive nothing odd in the mask's eye-holes?" "They are slightly unequal," I said, after a closer look. "Precisely. The right is larger by a hair, and the card faintly whitened where it was trimmed, altered with a knife not an hour before being worn. The exposed fibres have not yellowed. Why should a man enlarge his right eye-hole? To accommodate a pince-nez? He wore none. To improve a field of vision? Then he anticipated the need. I suggest instead a partner whose height and manner demanded a certain alignment for whispering. One stands on his right, the other leans close, the mask chafes and is trimmed. "You make me see a room, a whisper, and a knife," I said. "Then my labour is not wasted," he answered, with a rare warmth. He threw his Inverness over his shoulders. "Come, Watson, we go to hear a sweeper talk of footsteps. Nor goes then to watch the daylight fade upon Hanover Square. The fog is our enemy and our ally both. In it, men believe themselves unseen, and in believing, leave their traces. If our masked gentleman dined with an Italian scent, and smiled through guilt upon his cheek, the lyric rooms will have breathed it." "And the letter R?" I asked, as we reached the door. "R is a broad church," said Holmes. "It may stand for a name, a house, or a taunt. I would not condemn it yet to the alphabet of fools. Let us first find the place where wax met gilt, and a ribbon's knot was tied too fast. After that, the letter will tell us to whom it belongs." The street sweeper was found on a bench near the arches, with his broom laid across his knees and his cap pulled low against the drizzle. He rose as we approached, tugging a forelock with that mixture of independence and respect peculiar to his class. Lestrade's note had given the name Moxon, and Holmes greeted him as though they had been acquaintances these 10 years. "You were on duty last night along the embankment by Blackfriars," said Holmes in his gentlest tone. "Tell me what you saw at midnight, not what others say you saw, what your own eyes and ears gave you." Moxon sniffed, hawked, and sent a practised glance up and down the damp sweep of the river wall. "'Twas near to the clock's turn-in," he began. "The fog were thickish, but not yet clinged, if you take me. I hears a hansom rattle off toward Fleet, then naught but the wash. A gent goes by me, quick-like, head up, nothing of the stagger in him, white about the face, or so it seemed, till I made out the thing was a mask. Plain as a poker, with a black ribbon tote. He had a flower to his smell sharp, like the peel of them little oranges the swells buy at Christmas." "Bergamot," I murmured. "That's the word," said Moxon, as if he had it on the tip of his tongue. He carried his gloves, not wearing them, and a stick, light, with a small tap, not the clack of a heavy cane. Boots were good, neat. The heel bit the stones a mite as he went. He turned down by the stairs and stood looking at the water. Then comes another party, keeping the wall. "A cloak?" Holmes prompted. "Aye, an Inverness or some such. Taller than the first by a head, and with the left foot turning a trifle outward. Makes a difference in sound, it does. Right heel first, then toe, left toe first, then heel. You get to know it." This second one kept to the dark. Smoke to him, foreign, I should say, and by the sweetness. "Turkish," Holmes observed almost himself. "Did they speak?" "Not to where I stood, but I heard a jingle, thin metal knocking in a pocket, like keys upon a ring. The masked gent looks once more at the water, then steps away. I turned to the sweep, and next I knew a cab clattered from near the bridge, took up someone, two someones, I fancy, and off they went. I took no number. Fog makes fools of numbers. "Which direction?" Holmes asked. "Southwark way first, then cut west by the Sound, back toward the Strand." Holmes pressed a coin into the man's palm and added another without looking. "You have ears like a metronome, Moxon. Keep them so." As we drew away, he said in a lower tone, "Right heel then toe, left toe then heel, a small outward splay. Our second man wears a slightly uneven pair. Or his left leg has been set after an old sprain. The jingle of keys, the Turkish tobacco, the height, these are better than a face glimpsed in fog." "Do you think the cab returned the masked man to Hanover Square?" I asked. "Not returned, conveyed," Holmes corrected. "The lyric rooms first, then the river. But the order, let us allow the house in Hanover Square to speak before we impose our chronology upon it." By early afternoon, we turned into the quiet dignity of Hanover Square. The fog thinned now to a yellow gauze through which the bare plane trees showed their black arms. The lyric rooms presented a modest frontage, their discreet brass plate dulled by the fumes of the town. Within, ideal porter of the old school met us with such reserve as could be softened only by Holmes' card, and a sentence murmured in his ear which brought colour to the man's cheek and a bow to his back. "The masquerade, sir?" "Yes, last night. Private, a subscription of quality. We keep no names, as you understand," he said, putting a finger to the side of his nose in the theatrical manner of confidentiality. "But I can answer to the general. White masks were plentiful, though most had ornament. Your plain card with the black ribbon, I remember. Singularity is its own announcement. The gentleman came a little before 11, alone in sober dress. He asked for a small retiring room, number 3, off the side corridor." "Who joined him there?" Holmes asked. The porter hesitated. Holmes's fingers, which had seemed idly toying with a coin, came to rest. And the coin passed as if by accident to the mantel. The man looked at it as a cat looks at cream. "A lady in a green domino, masked," he said. "Very neat foot to her, and a perfume that put me in mind of the continent. There was also later a tall gentleman in an Inverness who remained, as you might say, in the background. I saw him but once, when he gave me a cloakroom ticket to fetch a parcel." "What ticket?" Holmes's voice was all balm. The porter produced from his waistcoat a small blue stub, number 47, smudged with a dull glitter. Holmes took it in his long fingers, held it to the light, and touched the smear with the blade of his penknife. Gilt, as I thought, and a point of beeswax. "Your cloakroom is where?" We were shown along a side passage, deep carpeted and heavy with the stale bouquet of last night's excitements. To the cloak counter was a polished slab with a brass rail. Behind it hung an orderly army of pegs, each numbered. Holmes's eye roved like a hawk's. In a corner, near the ledger, set aside, lay a plain white mask of the same cut as ours, its ribbon freshly trimmed at the right. On the rail, a faint thread glowed a deep crimson against the brass. "From a silk," I said, bending. "From a silk handkerchief," Holmes amended, laying our crimson square from the station alongside it. "Note the twist of the thread and the tone. I would match them even in the dark." He lifted the ledger with a forefinger. The porter made a squeak, then quieted, as Holmes gently replaced it unopened. "You are too discreet to show me your patron's private sign-ins, and I am too civil to insist. One question only. Have you, in your retiring rooms, a cabinet where masking materials are kept? Powders, gilt, wax?" "By kindness of the proprietors, yes, sir. For touch-ups." We entered room 3. It was small, with a pier glass and a sofa, a faint dusting of gold around the mirror's edge, and upon the little table a candle with a bowl of wax droppings, one drop caught with a hair that gleamed under Holmes's lens. "Stage gold," he murmured. "And blacklead," he added, scraping an invisible trace from the table's edge with a fingernail and smearing it upon a card. "Graphite, Watson. Our dead man's nails told us he handled it." "Here is where." "Then the theatre, not merely a ball," I said. "Or a ball that borrowed from the theatre," Holmes returned. He rang for the porter again. "One further trifle. Last night, did anyone send for a cab to the south side?" "A cab was called shortly after midnight to the rear mews," came the reply. "The lady in green left by the front with friends. The plain mask and the tall gentleman went by the side door. The cabman complained of a passenger who kept the window open, said he was smoking something too sweet by half." "Turkish," said Holmes. "You have been helpful, Mr. Dwyer. Should any gentleman of unusual height inquire for a lost key ring, be so good as to take his direction and hold him with a tale of your ledger until a messenger arrives from Baker Street." We left him blinking at this last, and turned our steps into Jermyn Street, where, as Holmes had predicted, Torrington and Blythe displayed in their window a fashionable profusion of serpents, owls, There's another antique conceits translated into studs and links. The manager, a compact man with iron-grey whiskers, recognized Holmes with the ready civility of trade to notoriety. "Those intertwined serpents?" Holmes indicated the design similar to that upon the corpse. "How many sets have left your counter in the last month?" The manager consulted a book without making us the present of his surprise. "3, sir. One to the property master of the Roxbury Theatre, Mr. Blount, on account. One to a Mr. Adair of the Albany, and one bespoke for a lady who declined to give her name, paying in cash, delivered to a lodging in Duke Street." "Duke Street off Hanover Square?" said Holmes lightly. "The same, sir." Holmes's eyes brightened. "And the Roxbury order, when?" 10 days gone. For a new piece. Greek, I believe. Or the gentleman took a fancy to the serpents for Orestes and asked for them gilt to show upon the stage. We took our leave with a courteous word. Outside, Holmes stood for a moment, the afternoon traffic streaming about us, his gaze turned inward. "You see it now, Watson? Gilt and blacklead at the Lyric Rooms, a property master purchasing our serpents, a lady of Duke Street with coin to spare, a tall gentleman who smokes Turkish and keeps his left foot slightly awry. We shall call at Duke Street for the Italian perfumer who sells bergamot. Bianchi and Sons is 2 doors from the lodging-houses. But first, I desire a box at the Roxbury, not to hear Greek, but to listen to the way their property master tells a lie." "You think he will?" I asked. "I think he must," Holmes replied, with a thin smile. "Then when a scheme requires the river to complete its eloquence, its authors seldom foresee the discourse of brass rails, beeswax, and Jermyn Street ledgers. Come." Before the curtain rises, let us speak with Bianchi. If I am right, the scent that clung to our dead man will be a signature as plain as ink. And ink, my dear fellow, once dry, is not easily washed away, even in the Thames. Bianchi and Sons presented a little island of the continent, set down in London. A narrow shop whose glass cases glimmered with gilt-topped flacons, and whose air was steeped in bergamot, lavender, and the faint iodine tang of imported soaps. A dark young man with olive skin and a well-barbered moustache bowed us in with a suppleness that suggested both pride and discretion. Holmes laid his card upon the counter and spoke in that level, an almost indifferent voice which, in certain men, compels truth by seeming not to desire it. We seek a particular note that clung to a gentleman last night, bergamot of a sharper, more resinous character than the ordinary Cologne waters. You sell such an essence? The young man inclined his head. Signore, we have our Bergamotto di Liguria, a stronger distillate, favoured by some gentlemen who prefer the sprightly to the sweet. Also a blend with Neroli, which we prepare for 2 or 3 clients only. And to whom of late have you sent the pure Ligurian essence? Holmes asked, examining the crystal stoppers as though they were puzzle boxes. To 2 addresses this fortnight, the perfumer replied, after a moment's consultation of a neat index. One to the Albany, for Mr. Adair, the other to a lodging in Duke Street. Our Hanover Square, room 6. The order was placed by a lady. She sent a boy with a sovereign and a paper in a woman's hand. Describe the lady if you can. I did not see her, he said, with a regretful spread of the fingers. But the boy was instructed to ask also for small tablets of beeswax, our pale wax, and a little packet of gold powder, such as the ladies like for their hair at the opera. We sell such trifles to the theatre sometimes. Holmes's eyes flickered. You are as much a chemist as a poet, Mr. Bianchi. One more trifle. Do any of your patrons combine bergamot with tobacco? I remarked last night, the odd marriage of your Ligurian sprightliness and Turkish smoke. The young man laughed softly. Ah, that is the habit of a tall Englishman who comes from time to time. He rubs a drop upon the filter of his cigarette-holder to correct the oriental languor, he says. I have scolded him that it spoils the leaf. He only smiles. He is, how you say, standing straight as a pike, very long in the leg, with a left shoe that squeaks because it is turned out. Holmes did not smile, but his glance to me had the quick spark I had learned to value. He thanked the man, purchased a minute vial of the Ligurian essence and a cake of the wax, and we stepped again into the yellow daylight. Bergamot to room 6, Duke Street, beeswax and gilt in the same basket, he said as we walked. One could dispense with 100 rumours when a tradesman writes plainly in an index. The fog had thinned to a damp veil drifting between the plane trees. Note the convergence, Watson. Adair of the Albany for our serpents, Duke Street for our perfume, the Lyric Rooms for our wax, and the Roxbury for our lead. When 4 streets call to the same name, I go to the house where coin paid in cash. Duke Street was at that hour a respectable thoroughfare of chambers and modest hotels. Our knock at number 17 brought forth a landlady of that determined tribe who blend civility with interrogation. Holmes, with his most domestic air, begged pardon for the intrusion and inquired for room 6 on behalf of a gentleman who had mislaid a token at the Lyric Rooms. Room 6, she said, pursing her lips. The lady left this morning. The lady? I repeated before I could prevent it. A decent person, sir, the landlady returned, measuring us anew. Came with a maid 2 nights ago. Foreign in the manner of her speech, though her English was as good as mine for grammar. She had the look of quality, and paid in advance for privacy. a green domino she had with her in a bandbox, though what a gentlewoman wants with a thing like that in November is past me. No letters, no callers that I observed, and she went away in a chaise to the corner, leaving the room neat as a pin. "May we see it?" Holmes asked, with that little lift of the brows which suggests that the question is a courtesy rather than a necessity. We were admitted to a compact chamber, looking upon the street. The hearth was swept, the counterpanes smooth, the air bearing only the ghost of a scent which Bianchi's vial confirmed with a touch, bergamot, stripped of its floral companions. Holmes did not ransack. He did not need to. He went at once to the washstand and lifted the lid of the soap dish, idle where a few grains of dull gold gleamed like dust in a sunbeam. He held the underside of the lid to the light. A pale smear yielded to his blade and lay upon his thumbnail in a translucent curve. "Wax," he said. And the glass, see here, Watson, breathed upon shows a clean wiped arc at the height of a woman's cheek. She was careful, but not careful enough for a window on Baker Street. He crouched to examine the carpet by the door and traced with a forefinger a faint scuff angled outward. The lady's shoe is neat. The gentleman visitor's, taller by the stride, turns the left foot a fraction. There is a dusting of black in the nap near the skirting. Graphite again. He leaned to adjust something and left a hint. He smokes Turkish, there is the sweeter ghost of it in the curtains, and he keeps a ring of keys. Holmes listened a moment. He had inclined as though the silence might confess. He came late, she left early. Neither wished to write his name. We left the landlady with a courteous word and turned our steps theatre-ward. The Roxbury, standing back from the street with its pillared portico and flaking posters, was in that drowsy bustle peculiar to an afternoon when carpenters tap behind the scenes and chorus girls chatter like birds in an aviary. The property room, a cavern of oddments where a museum had married a pawnbroker, was presided over by a red-faced man whose iron-grey hair stood up like bristles and whose large hands were permanently ingrained with the dusky sheen of graphite and gilt. "Mr. Blount?" said Holmes with the bright politeness he keeps for men who will shortly tell him an untruth. "Oh, we admire your antique taste." He set upon the trodden baize a pair of intertwined serpents, our dead man's pattern, drawn from memory. "You have sold these of late?" Blount wiped his fingers upon a rag that had seen all the colours of the rainbow, and answered with bluff good humour. "Lud, sir, we buy, we borrow, we make. Serpents, we've a set, gilt over silver for Orestes. They're in the dressing cases now." His keys jingled, a delicate, familiar music. "But if it's buying you want, you'll be after Torrington and Blythe. Gents like to take a bauble off us for a lark." "Quite," said Holmes. "Might I see your Orestes serpents?" Blount hesitated the fraction that damns a man in a drawing-room and passes for nothing in a dockyard. He turned to a velvet-lined tray and lifted a pair with a flourish. Holmes regarded the impression the lynx had left, 2 ellipses cupped in the nap where a third pair had lain. A film of fresh gilt powder shone where a hurried hand had brushed away the emptiness. "You keep a tidy book," Holmes observed, letting his eye wander over the labels on drawers. He ran a finger along the rim of a tin. It came away with a crescent of black. "Your Orestes will be splendid. Greek tragedy is forgiving of dust, but less so of missing properties." Blount laughed too quickly. "We've all we need, sir." Holmes's glance moved to the floor. The left boot by Blount's stool showed its heel repaired with a patch of lighter leather, and the toe turned out a trifle. He took no note aloud. "Pray forgive my curiosity. One last matter. Do your patrons ever borrow masks?" "From time to time," Blount said. more guardedly now. The lyric rooms send sometimes for touchings up. Gilt, wax, we oblige, discreet-like. And ladies of the town's better sort? We see 'em, he said, with a shrug that tried to be indifferent and succeeded only in being calculating. There's a Miss Rowena Vale, plays Clytemnestra, fine figure of a woman. She took a green domino for a charity night and brought it back with gold on the hem like a Milky Way. Left a handkerchief one evening embroidered with an R too, if you like such letters. We get letters enough on our odds and ends. Rowena Vale, I repeated before I could stop myself. She is quartered? Duke Street, sir, Blount returned, as if to say, There, I have paid you with a crumb. Now go. Holmes bowed, not in thanks, but in acknowledgment of a move on a chessboard. You have been vastly obliging. I shall admire Orestes from the back of the house tonight, if I may. When we were again in the street, the late sun had made a copper coin of the sky. Holmes walked a dozen paces without speaking, then gave a short, pleased exhalation. You perceive the pattern, Watson, and I hope you distrust it. Blount is tall, smokes Turkish, jingles keys, wears a left boot turned a hair outward, and traffics in gilt and graphite. He offers us a lady whose initial is R and a green domino to match a porter's memory. It is all uncommonly neat. Neat to the point of contrivance, I said. And yet, if he lies about the serpents— He lies, Holmes said simply, but do not assume he murders. The neatest patterns in the theatre are painted flats. A man who lives by illusion knows how to hang one where it will please the pit. If someone has draped Blount where the yard will most readily applaud. And Miss Rowena Vale? A name given too readily, he said. Still, we shall see whether her handkerchief once wore the tail we admired at Torrington's, and whether room 6 kept her only as a guest. First, however, I shall sit in the Roxbury's darkness and watch the wings. A stage, Watson, is a mouth that talks when the actors are silent. If our masked gentleman rehearsed his end among these properties, the theatre will murmur it this evening, if one knows how to listen. The Roxbury at evening wore its shabby finery like an old dowager, gleaming where the gas struck gold leaf, and threadbare where the hand could find nap. Holmes contrived by some occult arrangement of acquaintances to obtain a small box at the side, till whence one sees less of the players and more of the business that sustains them. He had no programme. He required none. His eye made a map of fly ropes, prompt doors, and property tables before the overture had found its key. "Attend there," he murmured, as the curtain rose upon a stuccoed palace of Argos. "The prompt corner. Observe the little altar with a bronze bowl. The pattern recalls the serpents. And do you mark beyond the property tin with its paper torn back? Graphite leaves a signature even when dismissed." The play advanced with that stately declamation which moves an audience to reverence, whether or not it comprehends. Miss Rowena Vale justified Blount's praise. She swept upon the stage in a dark-hued robe, imperious and cold as a winter sea, and the house thrilled to her voice. "In the wings, mister?" Blount's kingdom thickened with whisperings and cues. Men went to and fro with a stealth that was only half feigned, for stage and crime share a talent for gliding. Twice I heard the delicate chiming of keys. Twice a faint sweetness of Turkish drifted to us when a draught took the narrow passage between stage and lobby. Holmes had his glass to his eye, not for the stage, but for the thresholds. "There," he said softly, "left foot before the heel. Our friend Blount limps in the mind if not in the bone. And see," he speaks with the prompter. Palms exchange a small packet, the fingers shimmer, gilding powder. yet he keeps his hands too clean for a man who swears he is short of one pair of serpents. A liar tidies the very thing he wishes you to see. In the second act, a slight disturbance passed almost unnoticed by the pit. A mask, plain white, though with ribbon, was brought on for a dumb procession, and after the scene, carried off by a boy. Holmes leaned forward as the lad crossed the shadow of our box. "Hold, my little friend," he said, so gently that the boy halted of instinct. "From which basket did you fetch that?" "From Mr. Blount's drawer, sir," the boy piped, "for the priest's bit." "But it's not for this piece, really. Mr. Blount says there's always masks going." Holmes' finger stroked the ribbon and came away, faintly bright. "Gilt on the inner edge," he whispered to me, "and wax at the cheek. The lyric rooms lend, the Roxbury returns, between them a tide runs." At the interval, Holmes did not stir to the crush room. He sent me instead with a scribbled line to the stage doorkeeper, one of those harmless billets doux he composes which are yet read as orders by men who have learned to fear silence more than speech. When I returned, he was exactly as I had left him, fingertips joined, head canted. "The doorkeeper will detain Mr. Blount if necessary," I reported. "If necessary," he repeated. "But I do not yet require him still. I desire him in motion. That is when men write most clearly. Look now to the opposite box." I followed his gaze. A gentleman sat half withdrawn behind the curtain. Though his features were imperfectly seen, the line of him was unmistakable. Long in the leg, shoulders narrow, the head set with that straight, self-conscious carriage one sees in a certain order of clubmen. He raised a slender cigarette-holder. A trace of white vapour curled and drifted, and with it the Ligurian edge of bergamot. "A dare," Holmes breathed. "Of the Albany, and paying more attention to the passage behind him than to Miss Vale's Clytemnestra, whose charms, if the notices are to be believed, eclipse even her diction, he expects a messenger." As if conjured by the thought, a cloak slipped behind Adair's box, paused, and moved on. The curtain fell to a good hand. The house stirred and spread itself like a flock of pigeons. Holmes stood. "We go below," he said. "If the river is a stage where London plays tragedy, the stage is a river where London learns how to float its lies." Backstage, the Roxbury was a lane of screens, ropes, and odd candle flames in tin reflectors. Holmes walked as one who has every right to move unchallenged and no wish to be remarked. Did we pass the green room door, whence laughter and the clink of glass sounded? A whiff of bergamot threaded even there. At the property room we found its door ajar, and Blount within, counting, not without anxiety, a row of metal upon a tray. "Fine play, Mr. Blount," Holmes observed with cheerful malice. "How well your serpents shine." Blount's hand closed too quickly over the nearest pair. "We mind our own finery, sir." "As do we all," Holmes retorted pleasantly. "You will oblige me by not minding mine." His hand, swift as a conjurer's, whisked aside a bit of baize to show a narrow stripe left ungilt upon the tray where a pair had lately lain. "That gap existed an hour ago and has been lately supplied. Your keys, Mr. Blount?" It was a curious demand, delivered with such good humour that the property man obeyed without thought. "It's laying the ring upon the baize." Holmes lifted it, and for the fraction of a second his nostrils took the air. "Our perfumer has heavy customers," he remarked mildly, returning the ring. "Turkish, varnish, and a drop of bergamot upon the leather. You will pardon a man whose nerves have made him sensitive to trifles. I fancy you had an errand at the second interval." "I went to the door," Blount muttered, "for instructions." "From Mr. Adair?" said Holmes, as if hazarding the name of a cabman. Blount hesitated. A whisper sounded just beyond the door. The keys chimed. Holmes's eyes grew rather bright. "Come, Watson," he said lightly. "Mr. Blount must not be late for his cue." He bowed and withdrew us into the corridor, pressing me flat to the wall at a corner where a patch of shadow lay like a cat. The whispering approached, unaccompanied by that thin chime. Two men passed within a yard of us, Blount first, chin down, then the tall gentleman of the opposite box. The latter's left foot made its telling outward brush, the cigarette-holder glimmered, and the scented smoke trailed like a pennon. They made for the side door to the mews. Holmes moved after them with a swiftness that held no hurry, and I followed, my pulse rather quicker than I should choose. At the door, the keeper, primed by my note, affected to search the latch while he held it shut. "Jam of the evening," he grumbled. "Can't have gentlemen catch their sleeves." The pause sufficed. Adair's impatience betrayed him into a low, heated phrase. The vowels had that flattened quality one hears from men schooled, where the playing fields are polished. "If the yard's nose is here tonight—" "And it is you who stink of it," he said. "Keep your head," Blount returned. "The river took him. You said the tide—" Holmes coughed gently. It was the mildest of sounds, yet it undid them. Adair wheeled. The doorkeeper sprang the bolt. The fog rushed in with a breath that put out the tin lamps on the jamb. In that confusion, Holmes's hand closed, not on Adair's sleeve, but on the small parcel the property man hugged to him. It broke with a little tinkle. Two serpent links rolled to the threshold and lay winking like eyes. "Pick them up, Mr. Blount," said Holmes in a voice that would have suited a surgeon at a difficult moment. "The stage cannot spare its ornaments. As for you, Mr. Adair, pray keep your Turkish for St. James's Street. The Roxbury is draughty." Adair had regained his composure with a swiftness I must, in fairness, admire. He looked full at Holmes, and a faint smile cut his face. "I collect playbills, sir, not admonitions," he said. "Good evening." He brushed by us with that long, unbending stride and was swallowed by the mews. Holmes did not pursue. He stood a moment, head bent, listening to the eddies of movement the man's departure made, how a whisper ran down the passage, how the doorkeeper's stool creaked, how Blount's breath rasped like sanded wood. "You will inform the prompter," Holmes said to the keeper, "that Mr. Blount is detained a minute, and that the bronze bowl must be carried by the fourth super, not the third. As for you, Mr. Blount, you will give me the name that letter R stands for, or you will tell Inspector Lestrade why a gentleman in a white mask wore serpents from your tray to his death." Blount's defiance guttered. He looked toward the green room, where a burst of laughter rose, then died. "She'll not thank me," he muttered. "Nor will he." "She will thank the truth if she is innocent," Holmes returned. "And if she is not, the truth will not ask her leave." "The name." He swallowed. "Rowena," he said at last, hoarsely. "Rowena Vale. But it weren't her, I swear it. She's no hand for blood. Ask Mr. Adair. He has departed," Holmes finished. "Very good. You will also tell me how a plain mask of your drawer came to be trimmed at the right cheek for a face that does not wear a pince-nez." Blount's eyes flickered. "She cut it herself," he said. "Said the ribbon chafed. Used the wax to fasten it neat. I swear to God I never—" "Swear to your property book," Holmes snapped, and the sudden steel in his tone made the man start. "Oh, right there what you have done with the third pair of serpents, and where you took your packet at the interval, then returned to your altar of Argos, and pray your cues do not mislead you. Come, Watson." We gained the alley unobserved. The fog pooled there like milk in a basin. Holmes halted, drew a slow breath of the cold and let it go. The pattern tightens, he said softly. We have the lady placed, the theatre bound, the clubman traced, and a property man trembling. It is almost persuasive, and therefore I distrust it twice as much as before. When a crime paints its own scenery, one must walk behind the flat. And our next move? I asked. He smiled, thin and intent. We pay a late call at the Albany for Mr. Adair, or when after that we inquire of Miss Rowena Vale whether her R is the same hand that wrote a gentleman's epitaph upon a crimson square. Keep your ears, my dear fellow. Tonight London is singing, and if we listen closely, it may tell us where the river learned its song. The porter at the Albany received us with that blend of deference and obstruction which is the hallmark of a house whose tenants believe the street a moat and their stair a drawbridge. Holmes, with an ease that comes of many skirmishes in such lists, pressed his card into the man's hand and wrote 3 words beneath his name. I caught only the last, Blackfriars, before the card vanished into the man's breast like a conjurer's coin. Mr. Adair is at home, sir, he conceded after a glance upward, as if the cornice might prompt his memory. Oh, but he is not, receiving. He will receive us, Holmes returned, his tone perfectly courteous. Pray be so good as to take that up. We waited no great time before the porter returned, a trifle pale. If you please, gentlemen. Adair's chambers were well appointed in the manner of a man who inherits taste as he inherits his tailor. The fire made a show, the decanters were of the right cut, the rugs unrolled to their best advantage. Yet over this perfection there lay the faint disorder of haste, a chair thrust awry, a drawer not fully closed, a visiting card broken underfoot like a snapped leaf. The air carried a thread of Turkish, and beneath it a breath of the Ligurian essence. Adair himself stood by the mantel, one hand in his pocket and the other resting upon the marble, as if he felt safer in contact with stone. Mr. Holmes, he said, with a bow just short of insolent. I should have sent for you at my leisure. You saved me the trouble. Leisure is a commodity some gentlemen exhaust earlier than they expect, Holmes replied. He let his gaze drift, not carelessly, for it never did so, but in that half-absent fashion which lulls a watchful man. You have mislaid a ring of keys. Adair's smile touched only the lips. Your reputation is well earned. My man has been careless. Your man? Holmes said, as if repeating the phrase for its sound. Is that your man who snores like a saw? The smallest muscle in Adair's jaw moved. Holmes crossed the carpet, lifted a velvet portiere half a foot, and disclosed a boot heel and a portion of trouser upon a couch. He set a glass of water upon the floor with the gentleness one might use in a sick room. "High chloroform," he observed. "Neat. No spillage on the nap, applied with a discipline uncommon among common thieves. I do not advise anticipation of wakefulness for another hour." Adair's hand came off the mantel. He took a step, halted, and schooled his face. "You trespass, Mr. Holmes?" "I observe," said Holmes, with that dry urbanity which will outlast any frown in London. "You will also forgive me if, as a physician, my friend examines your valet when we depart. Meanwhile, since we are here, shall we spare the yard, the errand boys? Your keys, your bank, your club, perhaps a river door, were removed while you attended the Roxbury. They have not been returned. And you have an appointment, by your clock and your fire, which you will miss if we do not speak quickly." Adair drew breath to a retort and decided against it. Or what do you want? "The truth placed in its correct order," Holmes returned. "We can begin modestly. The gentleman found this morning below Blackfriars. You knew him." Adair paused a fraction, then looked Holmes full in the face. "I do not know dead men, sir. The living occupy me amply." Holmes glanced at the grate. A corner of creamy card, half-charred, lay among the cinders. With the tongs he drew it out. The fire had spent the name, but left a crest, a stag currant with a small motto ribbon. He dusted it with his sleeve and turned to me. "The Stag of Rivenhall, Watson." Adair's courtesy cracked. "Damn you," he said softly. "Thank you," Holmes returned, as if the oath had been a footman. "So the dead man is James Rivenhall or his brother? I will choose James by the cut of the boot. Parisian for the younger, London for the elder, and by the fact that the elder, Mr. Edward Rivenhall, wears a club ring that would have marked the glove. You dined with James last night, here or at the Lyric, and you both visited the rooms. Later, a lady in a green domino took a retiring room. A property master smudged himself with graphite and gilt. Your keys changed hands. A mask was trimmed and waxed, and the river learned a name. Where, Mr. Adair, did your neat arrangement miscarry that you now stand with an insensible valet and an empty key ring?" His colour rose and fell. "If you imagine," he said, with an iciness that would have suited December, "that I shall plead at your confessional." A knock at the door cut him short. A boy entered, breathless, with a message upon a salver. Adair opened it. His eye flicked. He folded the paper with care. Your presence has become inconvenient, Mr. Holmes." "On the contrary," Holmes said, "it is precisely convenient." He moved so slightly that I hardly marked the change, and then his long fingers were at the boy's sleeve, not ungentle, but preventing departure. "You will indulge me, sir?" The messenger's hands smell of beeswax, not ink. The fold is clean. The paper bears the faintest glitter. Mr. Blount has learned to write. Adair's control frayed. "I owe you nothing," he said, and there was a tremor in the words, like heat over a road. "You will leave my rooms." Holmes inclined his head as if conceding the point with good grace. "With pleasure. Before I do, accept a piece of counsel at no fee. You are being framed by men clever enough to make use of your vices and clumsy enough to leave their trade upon your sleeve. If you continue to play the patron, you will shortly be reduced to a property." He turned to go. Then, with that disconcerting lightness which to this day can make me feel I have missed 2 steps upon a staircase, he added, "When you write to Miss Vale, do not seal with black wax. It is too theatrical to be safe." The door closed behind us. I could not restrain the question. "Holmes, you mean—" "I mean," he said, "that Adair's bravado is an amateur's courage. He has been used, and he will repay the insult which makes him dangerous to our quarry and useful to us." He paused on the stair, his head slightly bent. "Hark!" From the street there rose that singular, half-stifled cry which Londoners utter when a commotion begins, and they are not yet sure whether it will lead to a story or the station house. Holmes took the last 6 steps as one. And we were in the courtyard in time to see the porter running, his face ashen. "A man outside the Mews! They've near throttled him." We were through the arch in a trice. A groom's lanthorn threw a wobbling circle of light upon the cobbles, where a figure lay, bundled in an Inverness cloak. The left foot showed under the hem, the toe turned outward a degree. Holmes went to his knees, fingers at the neck. "Alive," he said, relief so subdued that only I, who have heard his tones in all weathers, could mark it. Chloroform again, and a cord to begin what the drug could finish, if haste were needed. He lifted the man's hand. Keys hung upon the ring like a chime, arrested mid-note. "Not Mr. Blount," he added, peeling back the collar. "Though tall enough. Who are you, my friend?" The lids fluttered. A face came into the light, narrow, aquiline, the mouth firm. "Harcourt," the porter supplied, tugging his forelock from reflex. "Mr. Harcourt of the Lyric, one of the committee. He comes and goes at queer hours. I seen him with the tall gentleman with the cigarette holder." "Then our river touches Hanover Square twice tonight," Holmes murmured. He held the lanthorn close to the man's lapel, where a glitter dusted the cloth. Gilt, wax, and a smear of black along the cuff. He has handled the same trifles as Blount. "The stakes, Watson, rise as the drama should. They have attempted to remove a witness before he knows he is one." Harcourt's lashes flickered. His voice, when it came, was ragged. "They took—" He swallowed. "Keys, the river locker. Number 3, the punt, said I had dropped my ticket." "The cloakroom ticket 47, Holmes finished quietly. "Rest, sir. You will talk presently, when it is to your advantage." He rose in a single, unhurried movement, but his eyes burned as I have seen them only when the contest sharpened to steel. "Watson, to Baker Street with Harcourt. Knock up Mrs. Hudson, brandy, blankets. Write a line to Lestrade to meet us at the Lyric with 2 men, no uniforms. I must lose 10 minutes and gain an hour." "You intend," I began. "To be 2 different men before the hour is spent," he returned, and the ghost of a smile touched his mouth. "There is a mask-maker in 7 Dials who owes me a kindness, and a waterman by Blackfriars who thinks I am his cousin out of Greenwich. If our friends mean to conduct their affairs by river and ribbon, and I shall oblige them with an audience they did not summon." His hand gripped my arm with a quick pressure that was both command and comradeship. "Guard Harcourt. He is bait whether he knows it or not. And, Watson, if Lestrade is tempted by the neatness of Rowena Vale, remind him that neatness is the enemy of truth. I will send a sign by the river before midnight. It will not be theatrical." He vanished into the fog with that uncanny disappearance which is not speed, but a correct understanding of when the eye ceases to believe in bodies. I bent to Harcourt, who stirred and tried to rise. "You are safe," I said, though I had no right to pledge such a thing. The lanthorn guttered, the mews dogs barked once and were silent. The city, which is one creature by day and another by night, drew its damp cloak about it and listened. Somewhere, to not far off, a watchman's rattle clattered, and then the river spoke, a broad, low rush, like breath taken in. The stakes had risen, Holmes had cast himself upon the current, and I, with a half-strangled witness at my feet, and a summons for Lestrade in my hand, felt the familiar tightness at the heart that comes when the play leaves the rehearsal and risks the stage. I got Harcourt to Baker Street with the aid of a cabman whose curiosity, though ardent, was no match for Holmes's name. Mrs. Hudson, roused with apologies, took one look at the pallor and the cord mark about the man's throat, and set about her remedies with the quiet competence of a field matron. I bathed the abrasion, noted with distaste the neatness of the chloroform application, no splash, no tremor of an unsteady hand, and, when the man had swallowed a little brandy, I saw him off into a shallow, dreamless sleep. Lestrade arrived as I was corking the sal volatile, his hat adrip, and his temper under that brittle control which in him stands for readiness. He listened without interruption while I recounted the evening's progress, the lyric rooms, the property man, Adair's chambers, and the assault in the mews, and at the end of it he whistled, not in admiration, but as a man does who sees not one difficulty, but 5. "You'll have me set plain clothes at the Lyric," he said. "I'll do it. But I'll tell you fair, Doctor, you've too many fine folk in this net. If I lay a hand on the wrong lady's domino, I'll be dusting my boots in Derbyshire before the week's out. And as for Adair, I cut in hotly, you will restrain your zeal. Holmes believes him used, and if Holmes believes it, and I accept it, until proof compels me otherwise. Lestrade gave a little tilt of the head that might have been agreement. Mr. Holmes's proofs have a way of arriving after the yard's patience is spent. Still, I'll take your word. 2 men at the Lyric, no uniforms, I'll go myself to Blackfriars. What am I to look for? A sign by the river before midnight, I said, feeling in my pocket for the line Holmes had scrawled to me in the Muse. There was nothing else, only the pressure of his fingers and that half-smile. It will not be theatrical. Lestrade's mouth twitched. Then I shall certainly miss it, he said, dryly, and was gone with the gust. I sat for a time by Harcourt and watched his breathing even. In his pocket I had found no note, no card, only a small smear of gilt upon the handkerchief and, knotted in one corner, a length of waxed thread of the sort ladies use to fasten a ribbon. I placed both upon the mantel for Holmes's eye, and left Mrs. Hudson with her injunctions, ring the bell twice if he stirs and no callers, and set out for the river with my collar up against the rain. The Thames at night is a different animal to the respectable river of afternoon. It heaves and mutters like a thing with lungs. The bridges crouch upon it like beasts at the watering place, and the lamps are eyes that see and then forget. I took my stand by the ladder below Blackfriars, where the weed clung and the iron was cold as death. The bells of St. Paul's had scarcely chimed the quarter when I heard, from somewhere to my right, a low, prolonged note, not a whistle, for there was no shrillness in it, but a tone such as a man can draw from a bottle's lip, if he has a musician's patience. It was in the key of D I peered into the gloom. An urchin materialized at my elbow with the suddenness of London's small tribes, pressed a folded scrap into my hand, and vanished into brick. The paper contained 4 words in Holmes's thin, unwavering script. Locker 3, let go. I crossed by the bridge, found the stairs at the Lyric's river entrance, and descended to the narrow quay where a row of lockers slept against the wall. Number 3 was a black mouth at my hand, a punt rocked below, secured by a coil that had been twice crossed, and then, with a neatness I recognized, finished with a half-hitch like a signature. I undid it and gave the punt a light shove. It drifted, as if grateful to be loosed, and the current took it toward the shadow that lay beneath the bridge's second arch. A shape separated itself from that shadow and became a waterman in a tarred hat, unremarkable, the sort one forgets while one is still looking at him. He leaned, touched the punt with the care of a surgeon's first contact, and let it kiss the side of a low boat that sidled out as quiet as thought. The boats kissed again and were as one. The waterman did not glance up. I knew the stoop and the balance of him, and felt a curious satisfaction in the knowledge that a mask-maker in 7 Dials had earned Holmes's debt anew. I had not long to dwell upon it. From the Lyric stairs there came the faintest jingle and a murmur. A key turned, a locker woke. 2 figures gathered themselves out of the fog and descended with that caution which is not stealth but suppression. Men who hold their breath in the belief that this will silence their boots. The taller had a cloak. The other's shoulders were bent a trifle, as if long service had taught them to dodge blows that no longer fell. They carried a parcel between them wrapped in oilcloth, long and thin as a ledger. Holmes's boat let the current draw her nearer, the punt idle against her beam. He shifted, no more than a cat shifts upon a sill. The men reached the quay, a key slid, a lid lifted. I could not see what they took from the locker, only that the second parcel made a deeper line upon the air, and that a whiff of bergamot, clean and cruel, came like a blade. From the stairhead a tread sounded, Lestrade's light foot muffled. Behind it another, heavier. The taller man's head turned. He murmured to his mate, who went down upon his knee and began to knot the first parcel into the punt. The knot was clumsy. He made a sailor's hitch into a granny and cursed soft. The taller struck his wrist, corrected the loop with a rapid motion I recognized from the dressing room at the Roxbury, and in that instant Holmes moved. He did not leap. He dropped his hand, and the punt, loosed with a jerk that was part rivercraft, part conjuring, jarred the oilcloth bundle into the water with a slap. The taller man sprang, but too late. The Thames had the thing and swung it out like a pendulum toward the deeper eddy. Holmes's pole came down across the clumsy man's forearms with a smart rap. A plainclothes man, appearing as if the fog had been taught to arrest. He had the fellow by the collar. Lestrade's lantern showed his hatless head and the satisfaction of his teeth. The tall man did not fight as men fight who are surprised. He fought like a fencer, with moves he had practiced. The pole met his forearm and slid. He took the jolt in the shoulder and, using the very thrust, spun outward to the chain that hung from the mooring ring. For a second he was a dark fish in dark water. Then his hand found the chain, his foot the rung of the ladder, and he was climbing with a speed that made me think of school playing fields and the pride of masters. I went after him and found my weight more honest than my agility, but the man at the top was met by another shadow, and this one had no scruple. "Good evening, Mr. Adair," said Holmes's voice, and the words did what no blow could have done. They stopped him. "It's not," he began, but the sentence broke as a hand in the darkness clipped his wrist, and the key ring he had reclaimed went skittering along the stones like a chime shaken from a church. Lestrade came up under my shoulder and had his arm in a moment. Adair did not struggle. His breath came in that savage rhythm a proud man hates to betray. "You are arresting the wrong man," he said through his teeth. "I am detaining the right one," Holmes returned, all silk. "Arrest is for later. Lestrade, the bundle." The oilcloth parcel, rescued by a boat hook at the expense of my respect for the Thames's appetite, lay upon the quay. Under Lestrade's lantern, it showed the stains of wax and the glitter of gold, as if someone had rolled it in the Lyric's cabinets and then taught it to swim. Holmes cut the cords with a small blade he produced from his tarred jacket and folded back the waterproof to reveal within a second wrapping of crimson silk, embroidered at the corner with an R. Lestrade clicked his tongue softly. "Well, well, the lady does not waste her initials." Holmes's hand rested upon the silk for the space of a breath. "No lady with a care for her neck leaves her own shop mark on the river," he said. He lifted the cloth. Inside lay a plain white mask, a pair of serpent links, and, bound in oiled linen, a little book. He put the mask aside, touched the linen, and frowned. "A memorandum in pencil," he said. "Graphite. Take note, Watson. If this is what I believe, it would explain why the water had to speak." Adair, held but not humbled, laughed once without mirth. "You posturing devil," he said. "You will never prove it." Holmes stood, the tarred hat in his hand now, the river glimmering behind him like a curtain ready to drop. "On the contrary," he said lightly, "I have no intention of proving anything tonight. I intend only that certain men should discover that the river is no longer their confidant and that keys do not always open the doors they expect. We go back to the Lyric. Mr. Harcourt will wake to a poorer set of friends than he slept with." He turned, and the lantern lifted, and in its pale circle I saw something I had not expected, a sliver of gold at the edge of the mask's right eye-hole, where a knife had trimmed it clean, and a hair caught in the wax that gleamed not dark but fair. The river had not washed that away. I looked at Holmes. He gave the smallest shake of the head. Not yet. And we moved as one, Lestrade with his captive, the plain-clothes man with the clumsy fellow, Holmes with the oiled packet under his arm. The fog closed after us, mild as charity. Somewhere upriver a bell tolled the hour. The play, which had been content so far to rehearse, had found its cue. The lyric by night was a hive gone mostly to sleep. Lamps turned low in the corridors, the porter's yawn hidden behind his knuckles, a last echo of laughter from the green room thinning into the stairwell like mist. We came by the river passage, Holmes shedding the waterman as a snake leaves its skin. The tarred hat vanished into his pocket, the stoop straightened, and in a handful of practised motions the man of the river became again the lean figure whose tread the boards themselves might have recognized. Lestrade, to his credit, it will confined triumph to the angle of an eyebrow. "Two of mine are placed," he murmured. "One by the lockers, one at the cloak. If a fly stirs the wax, we'll hear it." "Let it stir," Holmes said mildly. "Flies betray better than spiders." He tilted the little oiled packet to the light in a sheltered bend of corridor and drew from it, with a surgeon's care, the linen-wrapped book. He did not open it. Instead, he ran his thumb along the edge, then touched that thumb to the brass of the stair rail. A faint grey streak answered. "Graphite enough to write a sermon," he observed. "And if I know our dead man, a sermon with an offertory." We found Mr. Harcourt in a small committee room with a napkin about his throat and a colour in his cheek that promised complaint on the morrow. He started at sight of us, and then mastered himself with the self-importance of a man who has been assaulted and therefore believes himself interesting. "I was felled," he said hoarsely. "In an alley one associates with the highest respectability." "You were chloroformed by someone who keeps his bottles in theatre drawers," Holmes returned, drawing a chair to the table and setting the packet between us. "You will oblige me, Mr. Harcourt, by telling me what lies in locker 3 besides oars and river rope." Harcourt glanced at Lestrade and then at the book, as if it might bite him. "We keep in those lockers oddments for patrons who prefer to arrive by water," he said, each word chosen as if it were a coin being counted. "Cigars, tinted visors, capes. The river entrance is a convenience. London is a net of conveniences." "And purses," Holmes said. "When does convenience become conspiracy? When a book is kept not by the treasurer, but by the river. Is this yours?" He laid a finger on the linen. Harcourt's eyelids flickered. "It is," he cleared his throat, "a memorandum, Mr. Holmes, of private subscriptions." "Private indeed," Holmes murmured. He glanced at Lestrade without turning his head. "Inspector, I propose a small experiment. We shall not open this here. We shall instead convey a rumour through your plain clothes that the memorandum was lost in the water and that only the mask and trinkets were recovered. Meanwhile I will send 2 notes, one to Mr. Adair, short, in a hand, he will not mistake, inviting him to the cloak-room at 1:15, another to Miss Rowena Vale, requesting that she do me the honour of returning a certain handkerchief which bears her initial. I shall sign neither. The letters will be delivered by a boy with beeswax on his fingers." Lestrade's mouth made what, in any other man, would have been a smile. "A trap, then?" "A stage," Holmes corrected softly. "We have actors. Let them play." He wrote with my pencil on scraps from Harcourt's blotter, dried the lines with a motion of the wrist, and summoned the porter with a low ring. The man came. Holmes's voice grew confidential. 2 coins altered the temperature of the room. Presently, our little messenger vanished into the building's capillaries, bearing with him the scent of wax that Holmes had contrived out of Bianchi's cake and his own fingers. While we waited, Holmes examined, not the book, but the mask, holding it to the lamp and letting its edge catch the light. The trimmed right eye-hole glittered with a thread of gold. From the wax at the cheek, he teased the hair I had noticed by the river into a slip of paper. It gleamed pale as barley. "Miss Vale?" I ventured. "Miss Vale is a raven upon the stage and a brunette by daylight, if the posters be true," Holmes returned. "Hair can be borrowed, but wax is a miser with the truth. Let us keep the coin till payment is due." The quarter struck. We heard a stir in the cloak-room, voices flattened to polite shape, the rustle of silk, the faint ring of metal, as if a hand had caressed a key without intention. Holmes gestured, and we went out by the side passage. From the threshold of the cloak he could command the counter without being seen. Adair stood with his back to us, the line of him rigid, one hand upon the brass rail, the other in the pocket he favoured. Opposite him, not in green, but in a travelling mantle of dark blue, a woman's figure held itself with that stillness which is the theatre's other craft. Her domino hung from her arm, the hair beneath her hat showed not black, but a gleam that the gas gave the colour of wheat. "I have nothing of yours," Adair was saying, low and hard. "And if I had, I should burn it." "You had better pray you do," the woman returned, her English pure, but with a cadence that touched the edges of the continent. "The book is the only charity left in this house. Without it, the next mask to float will be yours." "Rowena," he said, with a contempt that was a cover for fear, "if you imagine—" She moved not a line, and yet the air around her seemed to shift. "Not Rowena," she said softly. "Do not practice your program on me." Holmes's eyes, very bright, and touched mine for a heartbeat. He did not step forward. He let the silence stand, and in that silence came another sound, the smallest chime of keys from the corridor beyond, and with it the sweetness of Turkish, as faint as memory. Blount, I thought, and saw in the same instant a shadow detach itself from the doorway's shadow and begin to move, slowly, to the lady's right. Holmes acted then, but with no flourish. He merely advanced as if to admire a muff dropped upon the counter, and, in so doing, placed himself between the lady and the shadow. "Mr. Adair," he said conversationally, "how punctual you are when ruin keeps the watch." Adair started. The lady's gaze turned to Holmes and weighed him, not for his name, but for his use. Holmes inclined his head. "Madam," he said with grave courtesy, "the cloak-room is ill-chosen for a confession. Then let us take the small room 2 doors down, where your voice will not be borrowed by 6 and repeated by 60. She met the suggestion with an instant's resistance, then, with a small nod, moved past him. The shadow beyond the door, that patient shape of a man waiting to be useful in the wrong way, tipped and retracted. Lestrade's plain-clothes-man, whom I had learned to respect in silence, had found himself a pillar to lean upon in precisely the necessary spot. In the committee room again, the lady removed her gloves with the composure of one who understands that panic is a poor dress. Up close, she was younger than I had supposed, and the line of the jaw betrayed a will that no stage could confer. Her hair, where the hat had compressed it, showed pale indeed. She did not sit. "You are Mr. Holmes," she said. "Very well, I am not Miss Vale. I am Rosalind Rivenhall." "The sister?" Holmes said, with that gentleness he can summon when truth at last chooses to come of itself. "The wife?" she corrected, and the word struck the table like a paper-knife laid down. "We married quietly last spring. My husband had enemies who would have turned our happiness into coin. When the book—" she glanced at the linen. came into his keeping, those enemies multiplied. Names, Lestrade said so abruptly that she looked at him as one looks at a draft. Later, Holmes interposed smoothly. Mrs. Rivenhall, you trimmed the mask? She did not deny it. In the retiring room at the Lyric, the ribbon chafed him. We had our disguises, we had our folly. He believed he could end the business with one meeting and a river that forgets. And he did not reckon with men who make their living on memories, on other people's. The book records payments, Holmes said, from men who bought silence. From men who bought places, Mr. Holmes, she returned, with sudden heat. Seats, preferments, contracts, under the cloak of a committee and a charity. My husband thought to turn it, to name them, to smash the thing. He was brave and, in this, stupid. They let him carry the book to the river because they had already planned to drown the reader. And you? I asked more softly than I intended. Why were you there? Because I am fonder of him than I am of propriety, she said, looking at me as if daring me to be shocked. Because he asked me to come masked, to be his second pair of eyes, because the theatre teaches one how to pass unseen. I am not Rowena Vale, Doctor, but I have stood behind her often enough to borrow a domino and a door. Lestrade had been turning his hat in his hands. He set it down now. Names, he said again, but the edge was clipped off the word and made it less a demand than a necessity. Mrs. Rivenhall drew breath. Harcourt, she said first, without looking at the trembling man. He keeps the lockers and the lies. Blount, he moves the properties and the persons. Adair, he buys excuses for his friends. Above them, her voice faltered. In the pause, far down the corridor, there came the hurried burr of a runner on stair carpet. The door sprang open under a hand that had no patience with hinges, and Rowena Vale herself stood a pace within, cheeks high with colour, a green cloak flung round her like a blade she had half a mind to use. You sent for my handkerchief, she said to Holmes and to Mrs. Rivenhall. You little fool. The word might have cut. Mrs. Rivenhall did not flinch. It is my chief quality, she replied, next to loving a dead man. Rowena's gaze darted to the linen packet and back. If that opens in this house, you will not leave it, she said, in a voice that had commanded whole stalls to silence. There are gentlemen beyond that door who would rather drop this theatre into the river than let you read. Then let us borrow a page before the flood, Holmes said, and the feline brightness was in him at last. Inspector, announce quietly that the book was lost. Lock every door that leads down. Post your men at the stairs. Mrs. Rivenhall, Miss Vale, if you will be so good as to sit at the table where the light is best. But we are about to see whether graphite prefers water to truth. He took up the little blade, slit the linen, and laid the book open as one might open a palm. The pencil marks, though blurred at their edges by damp, held neat columns, initials sharp as a whisper, R, A, H, B, dates, sums, places. Against one entry, the letter R was not the embroidered flourish of a lady's square, but a man's quick hand. Holmes touched it with a finger, and the river outside the walls seemed to draw a breath that might have been London's. The trap was sprung, the play had come round, and somewhere, in the passage where Keys had learned to speak, a man began very softly to run. The sound of running feet in the passage was like a dropped blade, soft, inevitable, and final. Holmes did not look up from the page. He merely lifted a hand. Ornan Lestrade's two men became suddenly present where a moment before they had been only furniture. Rowena Vale, who had not sat as Holmes asked, shifted her stance so that the swing of the door could not catch her shoulder. Mrs. Rivenhall's hands lay folded upon the table, still as prayer. "Close that," Holmes said, and the nearer constable swung the door upon a hinge that might as well have been velvet. "Not the front," Lestrade added, catching the sense of it. "Downstairs?" The second man was gone like a stitch drawn tight. In the hush that followed, we heard the skitter of something small along the corridor stones, the light scurry of a key ring, chased by a hand that feared to reveal itself. Holmes's finger rested upon an entry halfway down the open page. "There," he murmured. "Not the letter, its pressure. A man who writes with his whole hand does not sting the paper here and float it there unless he sits upon a high stool and his book upon a rail." "Harcourt!" Harcourt flinched as if a draught had touched his nape. "I insisted on the river lockers," he managed. "We serve our patrons." "You served a purse," Holmes returned pleasantly, turning a page with the tender care of a librarian. "But you are not the hand that tied a neat half-hitch upon a parcel while correcting a granny with a blow to the wrist. You would have called a carpenter. Yours is a deskman's courage. We are waiting, Inspector, not for a clerk, but for a man who has lived his life among ropes." As if summoned by the word, the door jerked an inch and then slammed hard, not by any hand in our room. In the same breath, the gaslight above us dipped and guttered. Rowena Vale swore under it, with a bitterness that belonged not to the stage, but to the alley behind it. "He means to take the gas and the book together," she said. "In the wings, there's a main." Holmes had already moved. "Lestrade," he said, in that very low voice which always puts me in mind of a wire under tension, "send one man to the cellar to the wheel by the meter. Turn it off until I count 10. Watson, your shoulder at that door, and then with me. Mrs. Rivenhall, if you please, lock this from within. Admit no chivalry that wears Turkish smoke. Miss Vale, keep your voice ready. We may need breath more than beauty." We were in the corridor at once. The lamps there were honest, not the decorative parasites of the committee room. Gagson they showed the pale scuff of a left toe turned outward, and the faint glitter of a brush of gilt upon the wall where a shoulder had leaned a heartbeat. Holmes ran, as he rarely does, without grace and with all speed, and I, panting, followed the wake, his coat cut in the air. We took the stair to the fly floor 2 at a time. There the theatre lay skeletal, beams and bridges, a black gulf below, pricked with the few lamps the night porters allow, ropes in their ranks like harp strings, counterweights resting as iron encyclopedias upon their shelves. Blount stood at the far ladder, one arm braced against a strut, the other reaching into a box that fed the main. He was not looking at the meter, he was working at a cord drawn over a pulley that led down into the wing where the little committee room sat like a box within the box. He meant to drop something into it. Holmes saw it as I did, and was upon the bridge in 3 long bounds. "Not the gas," he called. "The sandbag. Have him, Watson." I do not flatter myself that I had any man upon a beam, but the suddenness of my weight upon the rope took it a foot through his hands. Skin squealed upon hemp. The bag below that had been poised to arc into the wall, swung instead into the open air, and thudded harmless upon a canvas flat, with a puff like a held breath let go. Blount spun with the snake quickness of a man who has kept his feet on scant inches all his life. The key ring chimed, his left foot splayed, and a knife showed in his fist, a small theatre blade, sharp, not for blood, but for twine. His mouth opened upon a curse and found instead the heel of Holmes's hand in its wind. It was no elaborate struggle. And Holmes does not wrestle the way he reasons, he chooses the lever and applies it. The knife came down, bit the beam, slid, fell. Blount's wrist went with it into a simple lock that emptied him from himself, and in the same motion Holmes turned him and had him by the collar, his face pressed to the splintered rail. Below, as if a cue had been met, the gas went flat, the lamps sighed and died, the theatre inhaled darkness. We hung in it a long 3 seconds, 3 men and an argument about gravity. Then far beneath a lantern came to life where Lestrade's man had anticipated us, and the fly floor was a raft once more. "Rope," Holmes said. "No, this will do." He had taken Blount's own ring, which chimed now at his throat. "Mr. Blount, you have been placed neatly enough to play villain to any pit. And be advised, the yard prefers its villains to come down by ladders." He half led, half tugged him to the ladder, and we went down with that peculiar slowness all men assume when speed and death have agreed to wait for each other until the next floor. Below, Lestrade took the property man with a satisfaction that did not show in his face, but in the way his hand closed. "No fire," he said to Holmes without triumph. "Good." "Give him to the dark a minute," Holmes returned. "He has lived too close to footlights to own his words at once." He lifted Blount's left boot with the neutrality of a clerk comparing sizes, and turned it so that the sole caught the lantern. The heel had its patch, the toe its outward confession. "Inspector, look to his hands," Lestrade did, bending them back with a brisk, professional competence. "Wax," he said.
And gilt ground into the lines, graphite under the nails. Mr. Blount, will you tell me whom you killed yesterday, or shall I read it out of your thumb?" Blount was not a coward. He was what I have sometimes seen in the army, a man whose courage is of the rope, the beam, the narrow place where no spectator can interfere. He lifted his head and spat blood to the side, neatly, so as not to soil the floor he loved. "You'll hang me for it," he said, in a tone almost of relief. "And there's a gentleman what'll shake your hand for saving his neck." "The gentleman with the Turkish and the playing field shoulders?" Holmes asked, almost kindly. "We have him chilled, not saved. Name him." Blount's eyes slid sideways to where Lestrade's man stood, with Adair's long figure between him and the wall.
Adair had come up from the river passage like a man who has learned the wrong catechism and means to recite it loudly in hopes it may still please. He did not speak now. His face in the lantern was that of a punished boy. "Not him," Blount said. "He pays. He don't plan. He don't have the head for it. I never took work from a gentleman. I took it from a chairman." "Harcourt," Lestrade said in the tone one uses to read a number off a house for the sake of the messenger. Harcourt made a noise like a cork badly withdrawn. "I am a functionary," he stammered. "I keep lists." "You keep river keys," Holmes said, and his voice had no more rancour in it than if he'd said teacups. "But no, Mr. Harcourt, you are too careful to send the sandbag to the wall. The chairman to whom Mr. Blount refers sits a little higher than your stool, and he signs with a flourish more ambitious than your initials. He writes his dates in Roman out of vanity." He held up the book under the lantern. "Here," he said to Lestrade, "and you will see 4 letters that agree like a chorus, A, B, H, and this neat, important R that is not Mrs. Rivenhall's but a man's, the one I pointed you to before we came upstairs. And above them, here and here, in a hand that cuts the paper, F, M. If we turn the pages back, we find him a dozen times. We find his subscriptions round, his sums regular, his moods prosperous. We also find an entry in the margin, a small note in a smaller hand, our dead man's, that the committee proposes to present a list to Sir Felix at his house beside the river on Monday if certain conditions are not met. The dead are often explicit. Sir Felix Morcar, Rowena said, the name a sliver. And he is patron to every false virtue in town. I knew his purse lay behind our troubles. I did not know it was his hand. Not his hand, Holmes corrected, and his tone was almost courteous. Men of that rank leave homicide to the class that cannot afford choice. Mr. Blount? Blount's shoulders had slumped with the long depletion that follows excitement. I did the tying, he said. I did it neat-like. He never twitched. Turkish fellow played the lord and gave the orders. Harcourt made up the lie and kept the river door. The R in the book says who gets paid back when the gentry come round panicked. The lady here. He looked toward Mrs. Rivenhall and Rowena without contempt, for the theatre had taught him to honour skill in women. Well, she weren't to be touched, but the young covey, he talked big about names. Would names sink men faster than stones? Why the mask? I asked, and my own voice surprised me. Why add folly to murder? Because the river don't read faces, Blount said simply. And because a gent that drowns in a lark with a painted cheek makes a better story than a gent dashed off a ledger with a rope. He turned his head toward Lestrade. I'll walk with you, Inspector. I don't take kindly to being handled. Lestrade nodded once. The nearest thing to respect he has ever shown a man in irons. You shall walk, he said, but you shall also write what you have just said, and you shall sign it in that gilt of yours. Not here, Holmes added, shutting the book with a soft clap. Not yet. The gentleman with the initials will not come to the fly floor. He will wait by his carriage and ask a servant whether London burns. And let us not disappoint him prematurely. He looked to me, and there was that rare softness in him that I saw only when his mind had placed the last but one stone, and his heart unawares had moved ahead. Watson, take Mrs. Rivenhall and Miss Vale to the green room. Keep them among the laughter a little. Lestrade, Harcourt to the committee room, Blount to the station with your quiet man. Adair stays with me. We will walk him through his education. Then at dawn we will pay our respects by the river to a knight whose initials cut paper harder than any rope. He glanced once at the book in his hand, and then at the black gulf above the stage where the ropes hung quiet, like sentences waiting their verb. The fog is lifting, he said, and smiled without mirth. When London draws breath, it asks for names.
Yeah, we shall oblige it, with order. The dawn crept in pale and soundless through the tall windows of the Lyric, brushing the gilt dust of the stage with its cold light. The long night had burned itself away, leaving only the stillness that follows truth once it has fought its way into daylight. Holmes stood by the orchestra pit, his lean figure cut sharp against the dim morning. Lestrade, weary but alert, conferred with his men as Blount and Harcourt were led away in irons, their boots echoing like punctuation on the theatre's boards. Adair, pale as the ghosts of his own schemes, waited with folded arms. The proud defiance had gone out of him. Only the brittleness of shame remained. Holmes regarded him with neither pity nor contempt. You will give your statement, he said quietly. It will serve to separate folly from villainy.
And though I do not expect you to value the distinction, the law will. Adair's voice was low, roughened by the night. I never meant him harm, Holmes. I only— You meant, Holmes interrupted gently, to protect yourself from scandal, not knowing that men like Harcourt have learned to turn another's fear into coin. Your vanity armed their hands as surely as any pistol. Let that suffice. Rowena Vale had remained through the long hours, her cloak drawn close, watching Mrs. Rivenhall with a gaze half envy, half admiration. Now she rose, the mask of bravado slipping from her face. "You've finished it, then," she said. "The curtain's down." Holmes inclined his head slightly. "On this act, Miss Vale, London never lacks another stage." Mrs. Rivenhall looked up at him, the faintest tremor in her hands. You've given my husband peace, Mr. Holmes. I cannot thank you. He met her eyes with that distant kindness that was his rarest gift. Truth is a poor comfort, madam, but it is the only one that does not fade. He turned to Lestrade, who was closing the ledger, its damp pages pressed between blotting sheets. You will find, Inspector, that Sir Felix Morcar's name appears often enough to make your superiors tremble. I advise that you begin with Blount's confession. It will lead neatly upward. Lestrade grunted approval. I'll see to it, though I doubt the Yard will thank me for the names this book holds. Nor will London, Holmes murmured, but it will remember. Outside, the fog had thinned to a pale, tired mist, through which the sound of the Thames drifted, slow, heavy, and indifferent. Holmes stepped out onto the embankment, his hands clasped behind him, his gaze fixed on the river's dull gleam. I joined him, my own weariness broken only by curiosity. You were certain from the beginning, I said, that the mask and the river were symbols, not causes. He smiled faintly. The river forgets everything, Watson, except those who try to make it forget. A mask hides a face but reveals intention. Both are invitations to deceit. Once I saw that, the rest was a matter of listening to wax, to rope, to fear. We stood a while in silence. Then he drew from his pocket the small crimson handkerchief embroidered with its solitary R. The morning light struck the silk, and it glowed faintly like a wound beginning to heal. "Will you keep it?" I asked. He shook his head and let it fall into the water, where it floated a moment before the current took it. "It belongs to the river," he said. "Oh, as do all unfinished stories." He turned then, the wind lifting the hem of his coat. "Come, Watson, Mrs. Hudson will have coffee on, and there are quieter mysteries waiting on Baker Street, the kind no man need drown to solve." And with that, Sherlock Holmes walked away from the river, leaving the dawn to erase the last traces of masks and men alike. The following morning found Baker Street steeped in a familiar golden quiet. The newspapers had already begun their half-true verses of the Riverside masquerade scandal, though Lestrade had managed, through equal parts diplomacy and exhaustion, to keep the greater names from print. Holmes sat in his chair, pipe unlit, the morning paper spread across his knees but unread. The crimson handkerchief was gone, the theatre's dust brushed from his coat. But yet I could see the lingering glint of the chase still alive behind his calm grey eyes. "The thing that amuses me most," he said finally, "is that every actor, from Blount to Lady Vale herself, believed they were improvising. In fact, each read from a script written by Greed, with only the river as stagehand. Harcourt arranged the lockers, Blount bound the body, Adair provided the alibi, and Sir Felix, the patron saint of deception, composed the entire production. He believed, as men of his rank often do, that reputation is a fortress, but he forgot that I enjoy sieges. "You mean to tell me," I said, "that Sir Felix will face arrest?" Holmes smiled faintly, tracing a ring of smoke that rose from his now-lit pipe. "No, my dear Watson, he will face exposure, which is far worse. The law has its thresholds, but society that is a courtroom without appeal. His ledger was not inked with names, but with habits, the bribes, the blackmail, the manipulation of votes and patronages. Men such as he do not survive daylight. Lestrade has what he needs to make him disappear in the only way London understands, a resignation and a voyage to the continent under an assumed name." I watched him for a moment, feeling again the same mingling of awe and exasperation that Holmes could so effortlessly conjure. "You might have let him hang," I said quietly. "The murder of Rivenhall—" "Was Blount's hand, but not Blount's mind," Holmes interrupted. Rivenhall believed he could unmask corruption and still remain untouched by it. He forgot that truth and power are oil and water. They do not mix without fire. He was a brave fool, Watson, and brave fools leave widows. And it was for her I stayed my hand. Justice may feed the gallows, but it seldom comforts the living. I said nothing for some time. The morning sun had found its way across the sill and glowed upon the cluttered table, where the remnants of the case lay scattered, a vial of bergamot essence, a coil of waxed thread, a pair of serpent links dulled by use. Holmes regarded them with the faintest smile, the kind a man reserves for puzzles now rendered harmless. "The river has returned the mask," he said, almost to himself. "And yet the true disguises remain, the quiet hypocrisies, the unspoken debts, the respectable sins. London's current will always bear them along until it meets a stronger tide." "And you," I said, "are that tide." He looked at me with an expression that might have been amusement or melancholy, I could never tell which. "No," Watson, "I merely watch the ripples." He rose then, stretching as though to shake off the weight of the case. "Mrs. Hudson will have breakfast waiting, and I should like for once to taste coffee that has not cooled beside a corpse. Come, my dear fellow, our work for the night is done. Let London find its conscience without us." As we stepped into the pale morning, the city stirred beneath a sky washed clean by fog. Somewhere deep in its restless heart, the Thames moved on, mute witness, tireless confessor, and grave to more secrets than any man could solve. And beside me, walking with that lean, tireless stride, was Sherlock Holmes, already listening for the next whisper from the streets, the next mask waiting to fall.